Dust devils swirl around Wade's boots as three riders crest the hill, guns glinting. Beside him, the woman who calls herself Margaret wipes fresh blood on the porch step. "Friends of your," Wade asks, his gut twisting. He doesn't know she's Dixie Hargrove, a federal agent, and the blood belongs to the real Margaret, murdered by these men. She called herself by the right name. New details only Margaret should know. Even had the locket Wade had sent ahead as proof of his intentions. But when she smiled, there was something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Something that made his instincts scream that this woman had killed before. The strangest part wasn't that she was lying about who she was. The strangest part was that she seemed to know things about Wade that he had never written to any woman, things about his past, about the scar on his left shoulder, about the way he took his coffee in the morning, things that should have been impossible for a stranger to know. And when she looked at him with those sharp green eyes, Wade felt something he had never experienced before. Not the comfortable companionship he had hoped for with Margaret. This was something that made his pulse race and his hands shake. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with the wind pushing him forward. But as the sun began to set on that first day, Wade noticed fresh blood on her boot. Blood that was still wet. And in the distance, he could see riders approaching his property with purpose that looked anything but friendly. Whatever this woman had done, whoever she really was, trouble had followed her straight to his door. The question wasn't whether she was dangerous. The question was whether the danger she brought would destroy them both, or if somehow in ways he couldn't yet understand. It might be exactly what they both needed to survive. WDE's eyes fixed on the dark stains spreading across the woman's worn leather boot. The blood hadn't dried yet, which meant whatever had happened was recent. Very recent. His hands instinctively moved toward the rifle leaning against the porch rail, but he stopped himself. If she wanted him dead, she would have pulled that gun already. The woman who claimed to be Margaret noticed his stare and glanced down at her boot with an expression that was more annoyed than concerned. She wiped the blood casually against the wooden step, as if cleaning mud from a Sunday walk. The ease of that gesture told Wade everything he needed to know about how familiar she was with violence. Three riders crested the hill in the distance, moving with the steady purpose of men tracking prey. They were still too far to make out faces, but close enough that Wade could see the glint of metal in their hands. The woman followed his gaze and her entire posture changed. Her right hand drifted toward her gun. And for the first time since she arrived, Wade saw something that might have been fear flash across her features. "Those friends of yours?" Wade asked, his voice carefully neutral. He had learned long ago that showing fear to dangerous people was like bleeding in water full of sharks. She turned those green eyes back to him, and now he could see calculation behind them. She was weighing options, deciding how much truth she could afford to tell. "Depends on your definition of friends," she said finally. "They're certainly persistent." Wade felt his jaw tighten. Whatever mess this woman had brought to his doorstep was about to become his problem, whether he wanted it or not. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the sheriff might as well have been on the moon for all the help he would be. Out here, a man handled his own troubles or died trying. "How much time do we have?" he asked, surprising himself with the word "we." But something about the way she stood, ready to fight against odds that clearly weren't in her favor, made him think of a cornered wolf. "Dangerous, yes, but also desperate. Maybe 10 minutes if we're lucky," she replied, checking the rounds in her gun with practice efficiency. "Less if they're better trackers than I gave them credit for." Wade made a decision that would change everything. Instead of ordering her off his property, instead of trying to distance himself from whatever trouble she carried, he stepped inside his cabin and emerged with his rifle and a box of ammunition. "Then I guess we better get ready." The woman stared at him with something that might have been surprise. "You don't even know what they want." "I know they're riding hard toward my land with guns drawn," Wade said, loading his rifle with steady hands. "That's enough." But even as he spoke, Wade couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. Something about the way she held herself, the way she seemed to know his land almost as well as he did. Almost as if she had been watching his place long before today. And if that was true, then this meeting was no accident at all. The woman moved around WDE's property with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time studying the layout. She positioned herself behind the water trough without hesitation, choosing the exact spot that provided the best cover while maintaining clear sight lines to the approaching riders. WDE had discovered that position himself after living here for 3 years. "You've been here before," he said, settling behind the corner of his cabin. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. A woman traveling alone learns to scout safe places to rest. Her fingers traced the edge of the trough, and Wade noticed how she tested its thickness with the familiarity of someone who had done this exact calculation before. Your land appeared suitable. The riders were close enough now that Wade could make out their faces. 3 men, all armed, all wearing the grim expressions of people who had traveled far for something they intended to take by force. The man in the lead had a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, and when he smiled, it was the kind of smile that promised pain. "Dixie Hargrove," the scarred man called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "We know you're here. Come out and we might let your friend live." Wade felt something cold settle in his stomach. Dixie, not Margaret. The woman beside him had tensed at the sound of her real name, but she didn't look surprised that they had found her. She looked like someone who had been expecting this confrontation for a long time. "How many people have you killed, Dixie?" Wade asked quietly, never taking his eyes off the approaching riders. "Not as many as them," she replied, and there was something in her voice that made Wade believe her, and never anyone who didn't deserve it. The lead rider raised his hand, bringing his companions to a halt about 50 yards from the cabin. "We can do this easy or hard, Dixie, but either way, you're coming with us." Dixie's grip tightened on her weapon. "I told you in Kansas City, Crenshaw. I'm done with that life." Crenshaw laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Nobody walks away from our operation. You know too much. You've seen too much." His eyes shifted to Wade. "And now your friend here has seen too much too." Wade realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't just about whatever Dixie had done. This was about silencing witnesses, about making sure no one could testify to whatever crimes these men were involved in. The blood on her boot suddenly made terrible sense. "There's something you should know," Dixie said, her voice so low only Wade could hear. "The real Margaret isn't coming because she can't come. She's dead. These men killed her 3 days ago when she wouldn't tell them where to find me." The world seemed to shift beneath WDE's feet. The gentle school teacher he had been corresponding with for months, the woman he had been planning to marry, was gone, murdered by the same men who now surrounded his property. "They used her letters to track me here," Dixie continued. "I took her place because I thought I could lead them away from innocent people. I never intended for you to get caught in the middle." Wade felt rage building in his chest, hot and pure and focused. These men had not only killed an innocent woman, they had used her death as bait. They had turned his hope for companionship into a trap. But as he looked at Dixie, seeing the way her hands remained steady despite the odds against them, seeing the determination in her eyes to protect him even though she barely knew him, Wade realized something that changed everything. Whatever else was true, whatever else was lies, the woman beside him was willing to die fighting rather than surrender to these killers. And that told him everything he needed to know about who deserved his loyalty. Crenshaw was raising his gun when Dixie whispered something that made WDE's blood run cold. "Wait, there's something else. Something about why they really want me dead." Dixie's words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Wade wanted to demand an explanation, but Crenshaw was dismounting, his boots hitting the dirt with deliberate slowness. The other 2 riders spread out to flank the cabin, moving with the coordination of men who had done this before. "I witnessed something," Dixie whispered urgently. "In Kansas City, these men aren't just killers, Wade. They're part of something bigger. They've been selling stolen cattle and blaming it on native tribes to start conflicts, making money from both the stolen livestock and the military contracts that follow." WDE's blood turned to ice. He had heard rumors of such schemes, but witnessing it meant Dixie could destroy powerful men. Men with enough influence to make entire communities disappear if necessary. "How many cattle?" Wade asked, understanding now why they would kill Margaret, why they would chase Dixie across states. "Over 2,000 head, worth more than most towns." Dixie checked her ammunition again, and I can prove it. "I have documents." The weight of that revelation settled over Wade like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just running from killers. She was carrying evidence that could expose corruption, reaching into territorial governments and military commands. No wonder they wanted her dead. Crenshaw called out again. Closer now. Last chance, Dixie. Walk out and we'll make it quick. Wade made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of staying hidden, he stepped into full view, his rifle trained on Crenshaw's chest. This is my land, he said, his voice carrying across the yard. You're trespassing. The scarred man's smile widened. Well, now looks like we got ourselves a hero. He gestured to his companions. Boys, seems this cowboy thinks he can protect our little witness. Your witness killed an innocent woman, Wade replied, his finger finding the trigger. That makes you murderers, and murderers aren't welcome on my property. You don't know what you're getting into, friend, Crenshaw said, taking another step forward. This woman's got blood on her hands, too. More than you might think. Wade felt Dixie stiffen beside him, but he didn't look away from the approaching threat. I reckon that's between her and her conscience. Is it now? Crenshaw's laugh was ugly. Tell him, Dixie. Tell him about Denver. Tell him about the family you couldn't save. For the first time since she arrived, Wade heard Dixie's breath catch. Whatever happened in Denver, it was the wound these men kept pressing, the thing that made her vulnerable. Some things can't be undone, Dixie said quietly, but her gun never wavered. Doesn't mean I stopped trying to do what's right. The standoff stretched like a wire pulled tight, 3 against 2, with no cover between the groups and nowhere to run. Wade could feel sweat gathering between his shoulder blades despite the cool air. In moments like this, everything came down to who was willing to pull the trigger first. But just as Crenshaw raised his weapon, a new sound reached them. Hoof beats, multiple horses approaching fast from the east. Wade's heart sank, thinking reinforcements had arrived for Crenshaw's group. Instead, Dixie smiled for the first time since arriving. Right on time. Who's coming? Wade demanded, but Dixie's attention was fixed on the approaching riders with an expression that looked almost like relief. The sound of gunfire erupted from the eastern trail, and Crenshaw spun toward the noise with an expression of pure shock. Whatever was happening, he hadn't expected it. Dixie, Wade said urgently, who else knows you're here? The approaching riders emerged from the dust cloud with guns blazing, but they weren't shooting at Wade and Dixie. They were targeting Crenshaw's men with the precision of people who knew exactly who the enemy was. Wade counted 5 riders, all wearing badges that caught the afternoon sunlight. Federal marshals, Dixie explained, never taking her eyes off Crenshaw. I sent word about the cattle operation before I came here. They've been tracking these men for weeks. Crenshaw's face twisted with rage as he realized the trap. You set us up, you cunning witch. I gave you chances to walk away, Dixie replied calmly. In Kansas City, in Silver Creek, even yesterday when you could have just kept riding, but you killed Margaret instead. The sound of gunfire intensified as Crenshaw's 2 companions found themselves caught between the cabin and the approaching marshals. One of them cried out and tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. The other threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. But Crenshaw wasn't finished. With desperate fury, he lunged toward the cabin, his gun aimed directly at Wade. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with me. Dixie moved faster than Wade thought possible. She threw herself between them just as Crenshaw's gun fired, the bullet catching her in the side and spinning her around. She hit the ground hard but managed to get her own shot off, the bullet finding its mark in Crenshaw's chest. The scarred man dropped to his knees, then fell forward into the dirt. The yard fell silent except for the sound of approaching horses and Dixie's labored breathing. WDE dropped his rifle and knelt beside her, pressing his hands against the wound in her side. Blood seeped between his fingers, warm and urgent. Why did you do that? Because you chose to stand with me, she whispered, her face pale but her eyes still sharp. Even when you didn't know the whole truth. The lead marshal dismounted and approached them, his badge reading Deputy Marshal Samuel Brooks. He was a weathered man with kind eyes who looked at Dixie with obvious respect. Miss Hargrove, you took a hell of a risk coming here. Had to draw them out. Dixie managed, wincing as Wade applied pressure to her wound. They were getting too close to other innocent people. Brooks nodded and looked at Wade. You must be Langston. Miss Hargrove told us you might be willing to help when she sent her message. WDE felt the world shift again. You planned this? All of it? Dixie's hand found his, her fingers surprisingly strong despite her injury. Not all of it. I really did come here to lead them away from others. But when I saw what kind of man you were, saw how you were willing to protect someone you barely knew, I realized I could trust you with the truth. What truth? Wade demanded. Though part of him already suspected, Brooks answered instead. Miss Hargrove has been working with us for 6 months gathering evidence on this cattle operation. She's been risking her life to bring down men who've been stealing from honest ranchers and starting wars to cover their tracks. WDE stared at Dixie, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not a criminal running from justice, but someone who had been fighting for it. The blood on your boot. Whose was it? Margaret's, Dixie said quietly. I found her too late to save her, but I stayed long enough to bury her properly. She deserved that much. The pieces were falling into place, but Wade still felt like he was missing something crucial. Why did you really come here, Dixie? Of all the places you could have led them, Dixie's eyes met his. And for the first time since she arrived, he saw a vulnerability there. Because Margaret's letters weren't just about you wanting a wife, Wade. They were about a good man living alone, trying to build something honest in a world full of corruption. I needed to see if men like that still existed. And Wade asked, though he could see the answer in her expression. They do, she whispered. But even as relief flooded through him, Marshal Brookie stepped closer with an expression that made WDE's stomach tighten. I'm afraid there's something else you both need to know. We caught 2 of Crenshaw's men, but there were supposed to be 5 in this group. 2 more are unaccounted for, and they know where to find you now. WDE carried Dixie inside his cabin while Marshal Brooks organized the search for the missing men. The bullet had torn through the soft flesh of her side, missing vital organs, but leaving a wound that needed immediate attention. WDE's hands shook as he cleaned the injury, trying to ignore how vulnerable she looked lying on his bed. I'm not going to die from this, Dixie said, watching his face. I've had worse. That's not exactly comforting, Wade replied, applying a clean bandage with careful precision. How many times have you been shot? This makes 3, she winced as he tightened the bandage. The first time taught me to duck faster. The second time taught me to trust the right people. This time taught me that some people are worth taking a bullet for. Wade felt heat rise in his chest at her words. 3 days ago, he had been a lonely rancher waiting for a mail-order bride. Now he was tending to the wounds of a federal agent who had risked her life to protect him. The world had turned upside down, but somehow it felt more right than anything had in years. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? He asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. Dixie's eyes found his, and he saw exhaustion there beneath the strength. Because I've learned that good men often die when they get involved in other people's wars, I thought I could handle Crenshaw's group alone, lead them away from here without you ever knowing the danger. But you came here anyway, to my land specifically. Margaret's letters painted a picture of a man who built something honest with his own hands, who treated people with respect, whether they deserved it or not. Dixie reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I needed to see if that kind of man still existed, or if the world had killed all of them. Wade felt something shift between them, a recognition that went deeper than attraction or gratitude. And what did you find? I found a man who stood beside a stranger against armed killers without knowing why, her thumb traced across his knuckles. I found someone who asked what kind of person I was, not just what I'd done. The moment was interrupted by Marshal Brooks appearing in the doorway. We found tracks leading toward the eastern ridge, 2 horses moving fast. They're probably heading for the territorial line, but they might double back to finish what they started. Wade stood checking his rifle. How long do we have? Could be hours, could be minutes. These men are desperate now, and desperate people do unpredictable things. Brooks looked at Dixie with concern. Miss Hargrove, you need to stay down. That wound will tear open if you try to fight. Like hell I will, Dixie said, struggling to sit up. Those men killed Margaret because of me. I won't hide while others risk their lives cleaning up my mess. Wade gently pressed her back down, his hand on her shoulder. You're not hiding. You're healing so you can fight another day. He looked into her eyes, seeing the frustration there, Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to let others help. You don't understand, she insisted. Those two men, Parker and Voss, they're not just killers. They're trackers. They can follow a trail that's days old. Find people who don't want to be found. If they get away, they'll come back with reinforcements. Brooks nodded grimly. She's right. We need to end this here. Wade felt the weight of decision settling on him. He could send the marshals after the remaining men and hope for the best, or he could take an active role in protecting the woman who had changed his entire world in the span of 3 days. But as he looked at Dixie, seeing the trust in her eyes despite everything she had been through, Wade realized the choice had already been made. Some things were worth fighting for, and some people were worth any risk. "What do you need me to do?" he asked Brooks. But before the marshal could answer, the sound of glass breaking came from the back of the cabin. Someone had just thrown a rock through WDE's kitchen window, and attached to it was a note that would change everything once again. Marshal Brooks retrieved the note from the kitchen floor, his expression growing darker as he read. "They want to make a trade," he announced. "Dixie for safe passage out of the territory." Wade snatched the paper from Brooks's hands. The message was written in rough handwriting. "The woman for our freedom. Sunrise at Devil's Rock. Come alone or we start killing ranchers until you do." Devil's Rock, Wade muttered. He knew the place, a natural formation about 5 miles north that provided excellent cover for an ambush. They're not planning to honor any trade. That location is perfect for picking off anyone who approaches. Dixie struggled to her feet despite Wade's protests. "They're right about one thing. This has to end. Too many innocent people are at risk now." "You're not going anywhere," Wade said firmly. "Not with that wound and not into an obvious trap." "Then what do you suggest?" Brooks asked. "We can't let them escape to bring back reinforcements, and we can't ignore their threat to kill innocent ranchers." Wade moved to his kitchen window, studying the terrain beyond his property. A plan was forming in his mind. Dangerous, but possible. "They chose Devil's Rock because they think they know this land better than we do. But I've been hunting these hills for 3 years." "What are you thinking?" Dixie asked, reading the determination in his posture. "There's a way to approach Devil's Rock from the south that they won't expect. An old game trail that follows the creek bed. It's narrow and treacherous, but it comes up behind their position." Brooks nodded slowly while they're watching for someone to approach from the main trail. "Exactly," Wade turned back to them. "But it only works if they believe Dixie is coming to meet them." Dixie's eyes flashed with understanding and anger. "You want to use me as bait?" "I want to end this without anyone else dying," Wade corrected. "Including you." "The risk is too great," Brooks interjected. "If they see through the deception, Miss Hargrove becomes a target with nowhere to run." Wade looked at Dixie, seeing the conflict in her expression. She wanted to fight, wanted to face these men directly, but she also understood the tactical advantage of his plan. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something I haven't told you." Both Dixie and Brooks stared at him, waiting. "I know Parker," Wade continued. "He worked for a neighbor of mine 2 years ago before he disappeared one night with half the man's horses. I recognized him the moment I saw him with Crenshaw's group." "You recognized him and didn't say anything?" Brooks demanded. "I wasn't certain until I saw the scar on his left hand. Parker cut himself badly on barbed wire and refused to see a doctor." "That scar is distinctive." Wade checked his rifle again. "He's not just a tracker. He's a coward who only fights when he has overwhelming advantages." Dixie winced as she moved closer to Wade. "What does that mean for us?" "It means he'll position himself where he can run if things go wrong. Probably on the north side of Devil's Rock with the horses." Wade met her eyes, seeing trust there despite the pain she was feeling. "And it means he'll expect you to come from the direction that gives him the best shot." "This is insane," Brooks muttered, but Wade could see he was considering the plan. "Maybe," Wade agreed, "but it's also our best chance to end this without a prolonged hunt that puts other people at risk." Dixie placed her hand on WDE's arm, her touch sending warmth through him despite the danger they faced. "If we do this, if we take this risk together, what happens after when the shooting stops in the marshals right away?" Wade looked into her eyes. Seeing the question behind the question, she wasn't just asking about tactics. She was asking about them, about whether what had grown between them could survive in a world without constant danger. "I guess we find out if what we have is real," he said quietly, or if it was just two people finding each other in the middle of a storm. But before Dixie could respond, another sound reached them from outside. Multiple horses approaching fast. Too many to be just Parker and Voss returning. Marshal Brooks moved to the window, his face going pale. "Reinforcements," he said grimly. "At least 8 riders, all armed." Wade felt his heart sink. Their plan had just become impossible, and the trap was closing around them faster than they had anticipated. The approaching riders weren't reinforcements for Parker and Voss. As they drew closer, Wade could see the glint of federal badges and the disciplined formation of lawmen, not criminals. Marshal Brooks stepped outside and raised his hand in greeting. "Additional marshals from the territorial office," Brooks explained as the riders dismounted. "I sent word yesterday requesting backup when we learned how extensive this cattle operation was." Wade felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by renewed determination. With this, many federal agents, they could end the threat permanently instead of just driving it away to terrorize other communities. Marshal Thompson Brooks addressed the lead rider, a tall man with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. Perfect timing. "We have 2 more of Crenshaw's men holed up at Devil's Rock, threatening to kill innocent ranchers if we don't let them escape." Thompson dismounted and studied the tactical situation quickly. "How many civilians in the immediate area?" 3 families within 10 miles, Wade answered. "Good people who don't deserve to pay for my decision to harbor Miss Hargrove." "You didn't harbor anyone," Dixie said firmly from the doorway, leaning against the frame but standing upright. "You protected a federal agent from criminals. There's a difference." Thompson looked at Dixie with respect. "Miss Hargrove, your evidence has already led to arrests in Kansas City and Denver. This cattle operation involved territorial officials, military contractors, and at least a dozen criminals. You've broken up something that could have started wars." Wade helped Dixie back inside, but she waved away his attempts to make her lie down. "What's the plan for Parker and Voss?" "We surround Devil's Rock with enough firepower that they have no choice but to surrender," Thompson said. "No negotiations, no trades, no innocent people put at risk." "They won't surrender," Wade warned. "Parker's a coward, but he's also desperate. Cornered animals do unpredictable things." "Then we end it quickly," Thompson replied. "Miss Hargrove, you've done enough. Rest and let us handle the cleanup." But Dixie shook her head. "Those men killed Margaret because I led them to her. I finished what I started." WDE saw the determination in her eyes and recognized it as something that couldn't be argued with. "If she goes, I go with her." "This isn't your fight, Wade," Dixie protested. "It became my fight the moment you chose to trust me with the truth." WDE checked his ammunition one final time. "Besides, I know this land better than anyone. You'll need that knowledge." Thompson studied them both, then nodded. "We do this by the book. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. Parker and Voss are killers, but they're also surrounded and outnumbered 12-2. The ride to Devil's Rock took 30 minutes with Marshall spreading out to cut off all escape routes. Wade led Dixie and Brooks along the game trail he had mentioned earlier, approaching from the south while Thompson's men closed the net from other directions. As they crested the final ridge, Wade could see Parker and Voss positioned exactly where he had predicted. They had chosen a defensive position that was strong against frontal assault, but vulnerable to the approach Wade had selected. "Last chance to surrender," Thompson called out through a speaking trumpet. "You're surrounded by federal marshals. Throw down your weapons." Parker's response was a rifle shot that ricocheted off the rocks near Thompson's position. Voss followed with his own gunfire, but their position was compromised and their ammunition limited. The battle was brief but decisive, caught between multiple groups of marshals with nowhere to retreat. Parker and Voss found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. Parker fell in the first exchange of gunfire, his cowardice finally catching up with him. Voss lasted longer but eventually threw down his weapon when he realized the hopelessness of his situation. As the gun's smoke cleared, Wade looked at Dixie and saw something in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Peace. The weight of responsibility that had driven her across territories and into danger was finally lifting. "It's over," she said quietly, almost as if she couldn't believe it. This part is, Wade agreed. Now we figure out what comes next. 3 weeks later, Wade stood on his porch, watching Dixie tend to the garden she had planted behind the cabin. Her wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a thin scar that she wore like a badge of honor. The federal marshals had departed a week earlier, taking Voss to trial and carrying letters of commendation for both Wade and Dixie. The cattle operation had been completely dismantled. Over a dozen arrests were made across 3 territories, including 2 military officers and a territorial judge. The stolen cattle were returned to their rightful owners, and the falsified reports that had blamed native tribes were exposed as fraudulent. Justice had been served in full, but justice hadn't solved WDE's most important problem. Every morning for 3 weeks, he had awakened wondering if Dixie would still be there when he opened his eyes. She had recovered from her injury. The criminals were captured or dead, and her testimony was no longer needed. Nothing was keeping her on his land except her own choice. "You're thinking too loud again," Dixie said without turning around. She had developed an uncanny ability to read his moods, even from a distance. Wade walked down to the garden, watching her hands work the soil with surprising gentleness. "Marshal Brookie sent another letter yesterday." "I know. I read it." Dixie straightened and brushed dirt from her hands. "He's offering me a permanent position with the Territorial Marshal Service. Good pay, steady work, chance to make a real difference." Wade felt his stomach tighten. "That's what you've been working toward." "It is." Dixie turned to face him, her green eyes serious. 3 months ago, it would have been exactly what I wanted. A chance to keep fighting the good fight, to use what I've learned to help other people." And now Dixie stepped closer, close enough that Wade could smell the lavender soap she used and see the flecks of gold in her eyes. "Now I've discovered something I didn't know I was looking for." "What's that?" "Home." The word hung in the air between them, simple and profound. "I spent so long fighting other people's wars, protecting other people's lives that I forgot what it felt like to build something of my own." Wade reached out and took her hands, feeling the calluses she had earned working alongside him to repair fences and tend livestock. "What are you saying, Dixie?" "I'm saying that Margaret's letters were right about you. You are a good man trying to build something honest in a corrupt world." She smiled, and Wade felt warmth spread through his chest. "I'm saying I'd like to help you build it if you'll have me." WDE pulled her closer, his hands framing her face. "Are you sure? This life isn't glamorous. No adventures, no grand causes to fight for. Just daily work and quiet evenings." "I've had enough adventure to last 3 lifetimes," Dixie replied. "What I want now is something real, something that belongs to me, and someone who chooses to share it with me." WDE kissed her then, soft and sure, tasting the promise of a future neither of them had dared to hope for weeks earlier. When they broke apart, Dixie was smiling with an expression of contentment that transformed her entire face. "So what do we do now?" Wade asked. "We write to Marshal Brooks and politely decline his offer," Dixie said. "Then we finish planting this garden, repair that section of fence by the creek, and figure out what it means to be ordinary people living an ordinary life. And if you get restless, if you miss the excitement," Dixie laughed, a sound like music in the afternoon air. "Wade Langston, I've been shot at, chased across 2 territories, and nearly killed more times than I can count. Trust me when I say that waking up next to someone I love in a place I can call home is all the excitement I need." 6 months later, Wade and Dixie were married in a simple ceremony attended by Marshal Brooks and the 3 neighboring families they had protected during the confrontation with Crenshaw's men. Dixie kept WDE's name and his land, but she also kept her skills and her courage, using both to help establish a territorial women's refuge for those fleeing dangerous situations. Together, they built something that was both ordinary and extraordinary, a life rooted in trust, sustained by daily choices to honor each other, and enriched by the knowledge that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected circumstances. Wade never did get his mail-order bride. Instead, he got something infinitely better, a partner who had chosen him freely, knowing exactly who he was and what he stood for. And Dixie got what she had been searching for without realizing it, a place where she belonged and someone who valued her for everything she was, including the scars that proved she had fought for what she believed in. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.